Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to this session. This is the last session of the last day of SQLRally. It's always hard to do the last session because always people want to escape and it's quite hard to keep people here, but thank you for coming to this session. I also have this for the last draw of today, so please remind me to do that, otherwise I will forget. Okay, SQLRally is part of SQL Pass, and there are lots of materials on SQL Pass session recording for past summits and all that sort of stuff that you can use. A little bit about me. I'm Reza, SQL Server MVP, Data Warehouse, and BI architect and consultant. SQL Server MVP for 5 years now, and author of some SQL Server BI books and some webcast series as well. And these are my contact information. If you have any question, you can just reach me and ask your questions. Okay, we have pretty simple agenda today, which is an overview about Azure Data Factory and another very quick overview about SSIS, just warm up about SSIS, and then comparison between SSIS and Azure Data Factory. Just before I start, how many of you worked with SSIS? Okay, that's perfect. That's what I was expecting. How many of you worked with Azure Data Factory? That's good. So if you don't know about Azure Data Factory, don't be worried. We will have that as part of the introduction, and we will go through that, and then we will have a comparison. Okay, why we have this session? So I thought about this session in this way, that I'm a SSIS actually. I love actually SSIS. I love to work with SSIS. I've worked with SSIS from 2005, and before that I worked with DTS. So I was working with SSIS, and suddenly I actually understand that, oh, Azure Data Factory coming up, and then I got panic. Oh, what is that? And is it something that will corrupt all my previous work, or that's something that will replace SSIS? And then I decide what to do. I should actually face that panic and come with a solution. So I worked and I give it a go. I decided to give it a go to work with Azure Data Factory. I put my hat on and I worked with Azure Data Factory like that. And then I found that it's quite good things, and I was happy with that. And I tried to tell people that, okay, Azure Data Factory is nice, it's something that you can use, and that's pretty good. And then finally, I found that I should have a comparison between Azure Data Factory and SSIS to actually understand where to choose which one and what is the best solution for you. So that's why we have this session. Okay, Azure Data Factory 101. Azure Data Factory actually is a managed service that is part of Azure, and it's in preview stage now, so it's not general availability yet. This service actually provides a service that you can connect to different data sources, get data, do some transformation, and load that into different destinations. But it actually has some components that is a little bit different from ETL tools that you might imagine. Right. So you can work with Azure Data Factory. You can connect to different data sources like SQL on-premises, like SQL Azure, like your CSV files in Azure storage. And you can do some data transformation. There are some basic transformation like copy, or some transformation like C# transformation that you can write whatever you like and do transformation as you want. You can use pig or hive transformation as well if you want to use big data scenarios. And you have monitoring features as well. You can see, okay, what's happening, how actually data is moving, if there is any error, or if it was successful, how long it would take to actually do that job, checking all scheduled job, all that sort of stuff. And you can load it into destinations. Right now, it's only SQL Azure, SQL Server on-premises, and actually storage account, Azure storage account with CSV files is supported. But there will be more. And last but not least, it's a cloud-based service. So everything that you use, actually you pay for your usage. You do not actually buy the license first and do the things later. Azure Data Factory has a kind of simple structure, which is this structure that you connect to different data sources. And there is a data hub after that, that you bring data into that data hub. We have different data sets in that data hub. These data sets are kind of views on top of each table, view, data set, CSV files that we want to connect to it. We want to read or we want to write data into it. And then we will do some transformation into that data hub. We might have some intermediate data sets, and then we load that somewhere for doing BI, data marts, dashboarding, all that sort of stuff. We have an administration panel for Azure Data Factory, which is part of Azure Portal, part of actually new Azure Portal, which I will show you. And we have a new Azure Data Factory editor, which just released 3 days ago, and which you can actually write your scripts in JSON, create actually data sets, create connections, create pipelines, or that sort of thing. I'll explain that through a very quick demo to you. So main benefits of Azure Data Factory actually is that you pay as you use. It's cloud-based, and it's quite compatible with HDInsight as well. So I'll do a very quick demo of that. So this is Azure Portal, the new Azure Portal, actually preview mode of Azure Portal, as you can see here. And I just create a new Azure Data Factory. I just put a name for it, Rally ADF. We can define a resource group, the server that we actually want this to be loaded, I mean this metadata to be loaded, but I just keep that simple. So I just created that Azure Data Factory, and as you see here, let me just do a quick zoom. As you see here, it's just creating. So while this is creating, I'll explain a little bit about scenario that I want to show you. So in this scenario that I want to show you, we have some CSV files like this. And this is pretty simple CSV file, which has some customer information. It's comma-separated values, so we have customer information and too many columns, and then we have different rows, right? This is a sample of that. We loaded these CSV files in a Azure storage container. Azure storage container is like a folder in Azure storage. So I'll just show you the place of that folder. So you see this is already created before going to that. So my Azure Data Factory is already created, so I can do the rest here. Before doing the rest, I'll just explain the actually demo scenario. So this is my storage account. And in this storage account, I have different containers, which are actually folders. And one of these containers is actually customer CSVs. So here I have some CSV files. Those CSV files exist there. And I want to get data from those CSV files and load that into SQL Azure. So that's my SQL Azure, which is, this is the server name, and this is the table that I want to load this information into that. This is just a very basic actually copy of data. So we get data, we copy that into the destination, no transformation. It's just pretty simple. I truncate the table first. So when we create, when we create that Azure Data Factory, I'll go back to my Azure Data Factory. We can actually create connections first. The connections are actually linked services that we create. So we can have different kinds of linked services. One I create for SQL Azure. So my linked services are kind of data connections in SSIS, if you be familiar with that. So I want Azure SQL database for that. I put the server name here, which was GI1. I'm bad in forgetting. G5VGI8. G5VGI8. Okay, .database.windows.net. Database, my database is testdb. and I put the username and password there. Okay, so I created the connection to SQL Azure. I need another connection for Azure Storage, which is my CSV folder. So I create another one here, Azure Storage. I would call it a storage. Should be like this. And for this, I say it's Azure Storage. When I say Azure Storage, I need Azure Storage account name and the key. I just have that here, so I simply just use it. But if you don't have it, you can just get it from your Azure Storage account panel in Azure Portal. So I created connections. The next step is to define data sets. So a data set for the source, another data set for the destination, and then transformation between these two. When we want to define data sets, we have to actually define that through JSON. So there is an option here, which is author and deploy, which just released 3 days ago. If we go through this, we can create actually data sets, we can create linked services, anything here. The metadata structure of Azure Data Factory is JSON. JSON is a markup language like XML. So you write your metadata definition in XML. It's not GUI, it's not something like SSIS that you just drag and drop. Unfortunately, it's like that now. So if I want to create, so if I just show you a link service that I just created, for example, this is Azure Storage Link Service. If I click, this shows me that JSON script of that. Right now, I want to create a data set. So I just create a data set which is for blob table, which means it's for for Azure Storage account. And here I can define the structure of that. I can put a name, properties, columns, each column name and the data type and the location of that. I have a written example of that because it might take a little bit time to write that. So that's an example of that which I just copy and paste here. So this is my dataset name. I have these columns, customer key, geographic key, title, all that sort of stuff. Location of that is in Azure SQL, sorry, not SQL, it should be blob. I just copied the wrong one. So same structure, location is Azure blob location, customer-csv, which was my container, and it's text file, it has comma separated, so I can define all of these. And what is my linked service name? The linked service name is the link service that I just created, which is Azure Storage. So I'm saying that I have a data set that is connected through that connection to my CSV files. Okay, and how is availability of that? I want that to be available every hour. So when I do that, I just deploy. Oh, thank you. Yep, I think that's storage. Oh, right, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so I deployed that, and that's now here in my tables. I create another one for Azure SQL table, which is the same structure. The only difference is that this one is in Azure SQL, and the table name is customer table, and the linked service is SQL Azure. Deploy this one as well. So that's deployed. Here you can see is it successful or there was any issues. If I go here now, I can see both data sets. So these are data sets that I just created, a customer table from blob, which I just created, and that's the table source, the JSON script of that. If I click on table schema, it will show me that this is the schema of actually table that I just created. But if you want to edit, you should again do that edit in JSON. Okay, this is how we created those data sets. Now we need a pipeline, which is kind of a data flow in SSIS terminology. So for that pipeline, again, we have to do that in JSON. So here I create a new pipeline. Each pipeline has information like this. It has a name, properties, list of activities. Your pipeline might have just one activity, which is copy activity. It might have multiple activity, for example, copy, pick or hive query, C# activity, calling a stored procedure, all that sort of stuff. And a start and end of that. Again, I use a written example of that. So that's my pipeline now, which has actually the name, properties, and in activities, I just have only one activity, which is copy activity. It gets one input data set and has one output. The source is blob source, and SQL sync means that I want to sync that with SQL Azure. There are different sync types. And the concurrency, which is actually available when I have more than one activity. For one activity, it doesn't matter. So I just deploy this one as well. So this one is deployed. Now I can see what I created in the diagram view. So if I just click on the diagram view, it shows me that I have two data sets and the pipeline between. Okay, so that's two data sets here and the pipeline, which is just copy data from this one to that one. If I click on any of these data sets, if there be any scheduled job on that, I will see, yes. Any data preview? Right now, it doesn't have any data. You mean you just right-click and say, for example, explore data or something like that in Visual Studio? No, we don't have that, unfortunately. So if, for example, it's going to SQL Azure, we should go to SQL and query data. Yeah. Okay, so I want to schedule a job for that, like SQL job that you run SSIS package. So I want to schedule a job. For scheduling a job, we have actually command. We can do that in that pipeline definition, or we can do that through actually Azure PowerShell. So I want to run that Azure PowerShell. Have you worked with PowerShell before? Okay, good. PowerShell, it's, ugly, but you can do many things with that. So I want to do, right now, I want to do actually scheduling job. Before scheduling job, I just change mode of that to Azure. Okay, something happens. It's like Matrix movie. So when this happens, then we are in Azure mode, and we can write Azure commandlet. Azure commandlets are, for example, commands that you can create dataset, you can deploy dataset, you can schedule your pipeline, all that sort of stuff. Right now, I want to schedule my pipeline. So that's the commandlet that I use for scheduling my pipeline. Oh, thank you. Oop. Okay. Yeah, then. Okay, so it's actually set Azure Data Factory pipeline active period. That's Azure commandlet and resource group name. The resource group name that we put Azure Data Factory there, or Data Factory name, which was, I think, Rally ADF, if I be correct. And a start time and end time of, sorry, I should make it smaller to see what. The start time and end time. So I put start time at 4 and end time at 6, something like that. Okay, and do I want to create that? Yes. Okay, I have to add Azure account here. Sorry, I didn't do that. So the first time that you run your Azure PowerShell, you should actually add your Azure account. After that, it will understand your account. When you added your account, you will see a message that says your account is added, your subscription, that sort of stuff. Okay, I run that previous command again. Yes, I want to do that. And true, which means that was successful. Okay, when I created that, now I can come here and see what actually, where is that scheduled activity. So if I just double click on that, you can see that these are data slices that created based on that schedule that I've created. It was actually 1 hour availability. So you see that these actually created 5 a.m., 4 a.m., 3 a.m., and some of these are pending execution, some of these might be pending validation, all that sort of stuff. And this will actually start execution if there is something in the period that we are now. And I think we are at the period that one of these should start quickly. But as you see, this is the way that we create that, and if that starts, we can see that how that works. None of them starts yet. Okay. Okay, pending validation, so I expect this to start. Okay, we have now one in progress, and it says that it is running. After a few seconds or a few minutes, it will actually finish. Depends on the size of the data, depends on the connection. Usually it depends on the connection. The first time that you connect to that, data source, SQL Azure or Azure Storage takes time, but after that, it doesn't matter how many files you have, it's actually process those quite fast. Still in progress. Okay, any questions so far? Yes?
I am just showing with one data source. Let's say that I have a bunch of sensors somewhere that I want to collect data from. Should I have to set this up for each sensor, or should I?
You mean defining transformation? Where to define transformation, you mean?
Yeah, does it need to set up this transformation for each sensor?
For each pipeline, yes. So right now in this actually pipeline, I just said that, okay, double click. For this pipeline, I just said that it's a copy activity. That's the transformation that I have. And sorry, if I look at the JSON script of that, so it's that copy activity as part of activities. If I want to create a pipeline, definitely I need an activity. If I want to create another activity, like for example, joining, all that sort of stuff, doing some transformation, I should write pig script, hive script, or C# transformation. It's not that much easy as we do in C# that we have merge, join, union, all that sort of stuff, all that fancy stuff, but it's possible. Yes? On-prem connectivity, yes. On-prem connectivity actually works with that data management gateway. So we create a data management gateway and it connects to. Okay, I just show you. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that was the one that I was showing you, and it was successful. So you see that it ran and it takes 64 seconds and it completed. If there was any error, I would see that error somewhere. Now I just select data from that table and it shows me that there are some data in that table. These are kind of repetitive data, but these are just samples that I created. So that's a very basic example of Azure Data Factory, right? And now I want to explain a little bit why we do have Azure Data Factory. So previously, in most of the scenarios, we used ETL for data warehousing, which means we get data from different sources, we do transformations with tools like SSIS, load this into different destinations, which is good, but nowadays we have many data sources. We cannot actually use that way. I mean, we can use, but it's much more cost effective if I just ingest that data as it is. I just extract that and load that into some solutions like big data, like HDInsight. It's much more cost effective that I bring those as it is, and then based on the demand, I just do some transformation and that sort of thing. And that's where actually Azure Data Factory happens. So Azure Data Factory actually aims to this part of scenario that we ingest the data, extract and load, and then we do that transformation. But however, you can do transformation on the fly as well with C# activity and Pig and Hive and all that sort of stuff. Okay, very quick overview about SSIS. So you are all familiar with SSIS. I just do a very quick warm-up. SSIS is a data transformation tool. It's actually started with DTS and then changed to SSIS in 2005. It has many transformation, can connect to many data sources, data destinations. It's kind of a data integration, data transformation, data consolidation tools. And it doesn't have that cloud feature, definitely, but it's quite mature for doing that. And you can do many things with SSIS. You can define data flows like this and much more complex than that as well, and you can transform data. Many actually data transformation are built in, so you just drag and drop. Many actually things you can do without even writing a C#, a line of C# code. And and the main benefits: rich development tool, which is SSDT or bits based on the version that you are using, and many built-in transformation, and many other benefits as well. So I just want to show you a SSIS, very quick demo of that. So this is a very basic SSIS package that I have for each loop container, which loops through a directory that contains different CSV files and get that CSV file path and then load that into the database. I might want to archive that file or write a log somewhere afterwards as well. I just run that to show that how rich is, this development experience, so I can have a look at this data flow and see where data is coming from, where it's going to. I can even define error handlers for that, all that sort of stuff, which are quite fancy. Okay, so that's how SSIS works. Now I want to do a comparison between actually these two tools on different aspects. These are aspects that I thought it might be quite useful to consider. There might be some other aspects, but these are aspects that I think is worth to consider. I'll go through them one by one. First, development tools. You're all worked with SSIS and you know how good is SSDT and bits and how good is it for development. So that's the main benefit of that. You can design whatever you want. It's new version of it, it's available for free as well. You can download SSDT online and use it. Okay, so that's good. Development tools of Azure Data Factory, as you've seen, you need Azure subscription for that, which you can have a trial version of that, but it's not that much, fancy. We don't have drag and drop, those kind of features. We should write JSON script, which might be pain, and sometimes we should do some work with Azure PowerShell as well, which is not that much nice. Okay, we do have that new Azure Data Factory editor, but still there are huge difference between these two tools. So in terms of comparison between development tools, SSIS definitely win because we do have quite good graphical user interface. However, Azure Data Factory is quite new. Microsoft heavily working on that, and there will be big changes in that, like this Azure Data Factory editor, which released 3 days ago. So there will be some changes on that, but right now, in terms of comparison, right now, it's development tools in Azure Data Factory is not that much good in terms of the GUI. both need some prerequisite. In Azure Data Factory, you need that Azure subscription. In SQL Server Data Tools, you need SQL Server license to work with that, usually. So administration tools. You can do administration in SSIS, like deployment, like controlling how your packages worked, and monitoring your packages, all that sort of thing through Management Studio. If you are working with SSIS 2012 or later, it's SSIS catalog that you can access through Management Studio and do configuration, deployment, all that sort of stuff, monitoring. And it's available for free in new versions like 2014. In Azure Data Factory, again, it's actually a combination of Azure Portal, which we just have seen here. So this is kind of my administration tool as well. I can do some administration here. I can define some role membership, those kind of things. I can define alert rules, but still I have to do some stuff in Azure PowerShell. So still it's not that much good in terms of GUI. For example, scheduling pipelines or that sort of thing still needs to be done in that JSON. I mean, in that command line. So again, comparison between administration tools. SSIS has a better GUI, but both are powerful in terms of the GUI is the only difference. And again, they have prerequisite as well. Both of these are actually developer tools. So you don't expect Power User, self-service user to work with that. You might do that with Power Query, if you don't go to MS scripts of Power Query, but these tools are both for developer. And data sources and destination. So there are a huge list of data sources and destination in SSIS, even if you don't have your data source or destination in this list, like for example, you might not have MySQL, but you can connect to MySQL through some connections like ODBC, something like that. So you just use that connection for that. So you can connect to many data sources through SSIS and write into many data destinations. So that's a big benefit. In Azure Data Factory, right now, we just have these 4 data source and destination supported. Azure Storage, which is, or folders in Azure Storage, Azure SQL Server Database, and SQL Server Database on-premises. So you can connect from Azure into SQL Server on-premises, which is good. And that's with Data Management Gateway. Data Management Gateway is a component that you install on your machine. I just want to show you that you just install on your machine, and it needs a key to actually be enabled. When you actually define that key, then you can connect this to, you can connect from your Azure into your on-premises SQL Server, right? So that's that, and you can connect to file systems in your on-premises as well. This is new as well, so you can connect to CSV files on-premises. That's, again, through Data Management Gateway. In terms of comparison between data source and data destination, again, we have good, actually, list of data source and this destination in SSIS, so that's a big win. We don't have so much in Azure Data Factory, but it is still on progress, and they will add more. This last option here just added 3 days ago, so they are adding more features to that. In terms of data transformation, we have many data transformation in SSIS. You can union, you can join, you do sort, all that sort of stuff, split, all that kind of stuff. And OLEDB command in Azure Data Factory, we have good range as well, but it's not that much complete. So we can do copy, which is just a simple copy. We can call a stored procedure. So in a stored procedure, we can do many transformations. We can run pig or hive script. Have you worked with big data, HDInsight stuff? So pig, hive, these animals are for big data scenarios, HDInsight scenarios, that when you work with actually large amount of data, even if you don't have an HDInsight installation somewhere, Azure Data Factory can take care of that. So actually, Azure Data Factory can create that HDInsight cluster and process those files through that. You can write custom C# activities, which is a little bit hard to do, but if you are a C#.NET developer, then that's good. And you can run Azure ML batch scoring activity as well. So it's quite, I mean, more, these transformations are more big data HDInsight type of transformation, like that Pig and Hive, like Azure ML batch scoring activity. So it's more actually aimed to do big data HDInsight type of things. In terms of the transformation, so we have copy, C# transformation. All these are available in both SSIS and Azure Data Factory. Pig and Hive, you can run Pig and Hive easily in Azure Data Factory, but if you want to do that in SSIS, it's not that much easy. You should write a script to run that Pig and Hive. Definitely you can, but you need to write that. Or Azure ML batch scoring, you need to write some scripts to do that, but it's possible. It's much easier in Azure Data Factory. And we have so many data transformations in SSIS that's not available in Azure Data Factory, right? Pricing. In terms of pricing, SSIS, it's free if you want to do import-export, that kind of basic things. If you want to do standard things, so you need standard or BI license for that, like transformation, merge, join, all that sort of stuff. If you want to do some advanced things like capture, change data capture, for example, you want to do incremental load for your fact table, all that sort of stuff, you might need enterprise. So usually, pricing plan for SSIS is actually per features that you want. So for example, if you want more features, you should pay more for the license. In Azure Data Factory, plan is a little bit different. So it's based on the activities. So it doesn't matter which activity I want to do. If I want to do C# activity, Pig or Hive, if I do HDInsight on-demand cluster, still I'm paying same as I'm using the copy activity. Based on the number of activities, so that's, I mean, pricing for now. It might change tomorrow, or it might be changed right now as well. And we have two types of, actually, frequency. Low frequency means that this activity runs once per day or even less. High frequency means more than once per day it runs. And so it depends on, am I getting data from cloud or from on-premises? This pricing is changing as well. So again, it's not per feature. It's not per size of the data. Yes? Each actually part of that data flow. You remember that I created a copy activity for copying. So that's an activity. I can have another activity like running a C# activity. So in one pipeline, for example, I can have 1 or 10 activities, or I can have 10 pipelines, any of these has one activity. So in your one job, you might have many activities. Let me just show you an example here. So this is my activity, with my pipeline with only one activity. And I might have some other Azure Data Factories like this. For this one, I have more than one pipeline. And any of these have different activities. So if I look at the diagram here, so this one is showing that I have 3 pipelines. And for example, if I click on this, I have 2 activities here. One is copy activity, another HDInsight activity. So it's per activity. That's actually what it means. Yes?
For execution of activities. So if you
Yes. Yeah, if we have, exactly. If, pardon?
streaming data?
Uh,
If you have streaming data, you can integrate streaming data.
Streaming data. Yeah, you can have. That's actually something that you can connect to that through that StreamInsight as well. But I'm not sure about the pricing of that, how that works, but yeah, that's possible. So this is how it works, and it's not based on the size of data as well. If I have 1 gigabyte, 10 gigabyte, 100 of gigabytes. So in terms of the pricing, Azure Data Factory works much better. I mean, because you pay as you use. In SSIS, you pay actually for the features first, and then you get all that working. In terms of environment, we all have actually many data, large data warehouses, large data stores, and you might want to transfer terabytes of data, gigabytes of data. You probably heard about that scenario that Microsoft has a case study that transferred 1 terabyte of data in half an hour. Okay, that's a good scenario. You can just read in Microsoft website about that. But that was with a server with 256 gigabyte of memory, very, high spec CPU, all that sort of stuff. So if you want to have a, good SSIS server, you need to spend for your environment, for your hardwares, and it's not just spending that. You should write an email to your IT administrator. Okay, I want more memory. They say, okay, I should purchase that. Let's have a purchase order, all that sort of thing. So you have quite a lot of administration effort and environment effort for that, which we don't usually have that in Azure Data Factory. In Azure Data Factory, if you want to have bigger server, bigger HDInsight cluster, you just change that and you will have those kind of things. And you might want to pay for that bigger HDInsight cluster as well, but it's not so much administration cost on that. So in terms of comparison, in terms of environment, Azure Data Factory is much better than SSIS because you actually pay as you use and you get scaling out quite easily. Error handling. How many of you used error handling in SSIS? Okay, that's good. SSIS is quite good in terms of error handling. So if I just show you this example, so that's a very basic example of error handling. I can define error handler, event handler here that says actually if an error happened, do something. Or I can say even something like that. So if I can say if this specific task, transformation failed, then transfer those failed records to somewhere else. All that sort of thing, which is quite easy to configure, and you can get lots of benefits of that, because if that failed, then you have those rows actually loaded somewhere, and you can work with that way. So that's quite major type of technology, in SSIS, that you can define error handling, event handlers, you can define error outputs in SSIS data flow, and you can use some precedence constraint that says, okay, if it failed, then go to the next task. If it, for example, failed, but the other task was successful, do something else, something like those. In Azure Data Factory, we can define actually alert rules, which says that, for example, if this activity failed, if this pipeline failed, if I get 1 error, for example, do something. If I get 2 errors, do something else, and send an email to somewhere. So we can define these kind of things, but we cannot say that if, for example, this failed, then run the other pipeline. We cannot define that kind of thing. So it's not that much major as that. And we don't have event handlers, so we can say, okay, on starting of that, do that kind of things. We do have quite good error messages that says, for example, it failed because of that. So we have that detailed error messages, which is good. So in terms of comparison in error handling, we have alerts. We can define alerts in SSIS and Azure Data Factory both. We have error handling in both as well. Error logging in both, but error handling is only available in SSIS so far. Next comparison is deployment. So if we want to do deployment in SSIS, we have GUIs for doing deployment. I can right-click on my project and export that in Management Studio. If I have integration services somewhere, let me just choose my packages here. So I have integration services here. So if I want, for example, if I want to export one of these, I just right-click and export that somewhere, and this will create a package for me with ISPack, actually extension, and then I just run that, and that will run a wizard for me to deploy somewhere else. That's actually SSIS 2012 and later version. But even in 2008 R2 and earlier version, there are still some wizards to do that, like DTUtil, like those actually GUIs. In Azure Data, so that's in SSIS. In Azure Data Factory, we do have PowerShell scripts. So we write those PowerShell scripts. We can actually create a batch file for that PowerShell, which actually do lots of things in sequence, and then use that as a deployment script. So we just run that, and that do the deployment for us. So in terms of comparison, we have deployment features in both of these tools, but in terms of GUI, Azure Data Factory is not that much good. Monitoring. In SSIS, we have good monitoring. We can see all SSIS catalog actually reports if we use the new version of, by new I mean 2012 and later version of SSIS. So we have all executions reports, validation reports, what happened, was that successful, if it was failed, what was the issue of that. We can see all messages, all that sort of stuff, which might have quite detailed information. Right now I don't have anything special running, but we can define all of that, and we can also configure or package to when actually we want to run this specific, for example, package. We can say that we want to log many things. For example, I can say I want to log everything, which is verbose. That means I want to log all the messages. If I want to just do log errors, I can choose performance. So all of these are available through monitorings of SSIS. In Azure Data Factory, we have those monitoring stuff as well. So as you've seen here, if I go back to my previous Data Factory, so I can see this diagram view. That's the first one. If any of these data sets fail, I mean in terms of loading the data into it, I will see a red line on the top. Right now I see green. That means it is successful. If I click on that, I will see all the tasks which is running. If any of these fails, I will see a red actually icon that says it's failed. And if I click on that, I will see the error message here. Right now I don't see because there's no error. If I want to rerun any of these, this is something that we don't have in SSIS. If I want to rerun any of these, I can just simply right click and say run. If it was for 5 days ago even, I can run. That's the concept that we call that as data slice. In Azure Data Factory, we have data slice per each execution. So I can say, okay, execution of my Data Factory failed somehow last night. I want to rerun that. So I just right click and run that. That's not as easy as this in SSIS to do that. One thing more that we have in Azure Data Factory is data lineage concept. So this is a very basic data flow. One source, one destination. But if we go back to the other data flow, which is a little bit more, you can have much more complex data flows as well. I mean, pipelines as well, diagrams. So if I click on this, I have 3 pipelines. I have actually different data sets. So I can see that, for example, this data set is going to do that pipeline, generate another data set, then this one and this one, create another one. So that's the pipeline of the work. I have data lineage here as well. So if I click on this, I can see all of these pipelines and data sets are affecting that. But if I click on this, I see these 2 are grayed out. It's not that much, I mean, big and complex diagram. So if we have very big and complex diagram, then you can understand, okay, this, if that failed, that is this path. So and I can understand that if this failed, it's sourced from these 2 pipelines, that's sourced from those 3 data sets, and that's the reason of that. That's something that we don't have built in SSIS, and if we want to do that, we can do that, but if we want to do that, we should do some custom actually work for that. That's a big advantage here. So for monitoring, we have, monitoring of logging, GUI monitoring, graphical interface, drill through into monitoring to see what was error messages, all that sort of stuff is available in both, in SSIS and in Azure Data Factory. If we want something like data slice, data lineage, that is only available in that Azure Data Factory. For security, we can define security in SSIS, so we can say that these users can execute, these users can deploy, those kind of security definition. We can do the same in Azure Data Factory as well. So we can say, for example, in this Azure Data Factory, these are actually contributors. These roles are some readers or something like that. So you can see that I have different roles here. So I can say that who is contributor, who is reader, who is, administrator, and I can add, users to this, okay? And those users should have actually Azure subscription as well. So for security, both are quite the same. We have role-based security in both tools, which is fine. HDInsight compatibility. So SSIS is for 2005, is enhanced in 2008, 2012, nothing special in 2014. But, however, it's not something that built for HDInsight or big data scenarios. That can work with big data and HDInsight scenarios if you want, but it's not built for that purpose. Azure Data Factory actually built for that. So in Azure Data Factory, I can define some activities. If I go back to my diagram here, so this is a sample that we have many CSV files for a company that actually sells some. It has an online game, and users connect to that game, do some works, and there are many log files for that, many CSV log files for that, terabytes of those log files, and these log files actually processed through HDInsight activity. We get those, load that into a SQL server, SQL Azure to do some analysis. So that's the scenario that works here, right? So for this, because amount of data is quite large, we do use some kind of HDInsight activities as well. So if I click on that specific pipeline, for example, which gets 2 data sets as the source and produce 1 data set as a destination, it has an HDInsight activity, a pig activity, which if I click on activity script, it shows me that pig script, if you be familiar with that pig script. So I can actually run HDInsight scripts like that very easily. I can, if I be familiar how to write pig or hive, these scripts which work with HDInsight, I create that. And even for that, I don't have an HDInsight cluster. I don't have an HDInsight server somewhere. What I did is that in my linked services, if I go to this one, it will show me better as well. So if I go to my linked services, this one shows me that I just created a HDInsight cluster just for this purpose of, Azure, for my data factory, for my pipeline. So there was no HDInsight at all. I had only CSV files. I had SQL Azure at the end. So I'm creating an HDInsight in Azure Data Factory with this JSON script. I say, for example, cluster size of that is 4, do some other stuff. I write pig queries and all the rest happening through Azure Data Factory. It's much easy to do these kind of things in Azure Data Factory. And you can connect to an existing HDInsight as well, if you want to. So it's much more compatible with HDInsight and big data. So in terms of summary of comparison, so we have quite a lot of aspects. In most of these aspects, if it is something related to GUI, usually SSIS wins. If it is something related to transformation, it's usually SSIS wins. If it is something related to pricing and cost and administration, all that sort of thing, Azure Data Factory wins because it's much more convenient. You pay as you use. If it is something related to big data, if it is something related to Azure, HDInsight, anything like that, again, Azure Data Factory wins. So that's a kind of overall comparison of that. So that's comparison said. Then we have some hybrid solutions. So we said all of these, but the point is that Azure Data Factory is not here to compete with SSIS. It's not here to replace SSIS. Azure Data Factory is here to help SSIS to do some good solutions. So usually, if you do consider that main purpose of these two scenarios, in the first one, we want to do transformation more, ETL things. So that's SSIS. If we want to do ingestion of data in big data scenarios, we get the data into HDInsight cluster, something like that, and then do the transformation. That's where Azure Data Factory sits. So usually, if you combine these together, you will have quite good HDInsight possibilities, works with Azure Data Factory, which you can combine with many SSIS actually data transformation, and you have that hybrid solution. So you get data from many data sources, load that into HDInsight cluster. I mean, through HDInsight cluster, you load that into SQL Azure, and then you use SSIS and do many transformation on top of that as you want to do, and load that into your data mart. So that's kind of a solution that you might usually do. So in summary, before doing summary, any question? Yes, sir.
Would it be possible, is some scenario where you can make one call the other, make them integrate with each other?
That's something that is in the to-do list of Microsoft. I've asked that, I think it was a month ago, I've asked that, is that something that happened? They said that this will be available, but don't know when, but definitely will be available. So in summary, if you work with big data, if Azure is part of your scenario, source or the destination, if you want to reduce costing, pricing of administration, environment, all that sort of stuff, then Azure Data Factory can be a good response for that. However, you should always consider hybrid scenarios. And always remember that Azure Data Factory is a complementary service. It's not something to compete with SSIS. And in terms of reference to study more, there are quite good number of examples in Azure Data Factory documentation. These slides will be available, I think, in Rally website. If it is not available, you can see that on my blog address. And this SSIS book, if you have any questions about SSIS or if you want to learn more about SSIS, that's good resource as well. Any questions? These are my contact information, so if you want slides, if you have any questions, just send me an email. I'll be happy to respond. No question? Thank you. Just before you leave, I'll have to draw this as well. So if you filled out those evaluation form, just please give it to someone. So we can't just do a draw here because I don't think there will be any draw there. Thank you for that.